I brought flowers to surprise my husband for Valentine's Day. Instead, I watched him propose to another woman in front of 200 people. 30 minutes later, I had frozen every joint account we owned. By that evening, I had pulled my 83% stake out of his company, value $540 million. That's not the twist. The twist came 4 days later, when my lawyer slid a stack of papers across his desk and said, "Claire, these signatures aren't yours. I want to tell you how a marriage becomes a crime scene without anyone ever raising their voice." 31 missed calls, then 47. Then the number stopped meaning anything, because I stopped looking at the screen. I was standing in the front hallway of our house in Ridgefield, Connecticut, my coat still buttoned, my purse still on my shoulder, watching the porch light flicker through the narrow window beside the door. Behind me, on the kitchen island, a bouquet of white roses was dying slowly in its cream wrapping paper. I had chosen that paper myself that morning, a red satin ribbon, the old-fashioned kind. Ryan always said arrangements like that made him feel like a man out of a different era, the kind who still knew how to make an entrance for the woman he loved. I had believed that, once. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Then his voice, muffled through solid oak. "Claire, please, open the door." I didn't move. My phone lit up again on the console table. His photo filled the screen, the one I'd never bothered to change. Him in a gray sweater on the deck of our first house, before the watches got expensive and the smile got rehearsed. I let it ring out. "Claire, I know you're in there." His voice cracked on my name. "Please, just talk to me." Talk. It was a strange word to hear from a man who, building us 6 hours earlier, had gotten down on one knee in front of his entire company and asked someone else to marry him. To understand how we got to that porch, you have to go back to 11:40 that morning, when I still believed I was the one about to deliver a surprise. Northgate Dynamics occupied 4 floors of glass and steel in downtown Stamford, living walls in the atrium, polished concrete underfoot, a reception desk that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a healthcare software company. I didn't visit often. Partly by choice, I've never liked being looked at, and partly because over 14 years of marriage, Ryan had slowly and carefully rebuilt the company's story until it started with him, not with the two of us, not with a folding table and a rented office above a dry cleaner in Norwalk, where we used to eat cold Chinese food at midnight and laugh because the internet had gone out again. Just him. Still, I expected someone at that front desk to know my face. The young receptionist glanced up, headset pushed to one side. "Here for the celebration?" she chirped. I smiled. Ryan loved these little office surprises, the champagne toast, the short speech, the visible generosity that photographed well. "I suppose I am," I said. "Right through there. They're just getting started." I heard the applause before I turned the corner. 200 employees, easily, gathered under the skylight in a loose semicircle around a small stage decorated in white roses and gold balloons. A violinist near the back, someone filming on a phone, and above it all, the company logo glowing in soft blue light. Beneath the logo stood Sophie Landry, Northgate's new CEO hired 18 months earlier. I'd met her once at a hospital fundraiser. Sharp, blonde bob, quiet confidence. The kind of poise people mistake for the whole personality instead of just the surface of one. Ryan stood beside her. He was smiling the way he smiled for cameras, wide, practiced, one hand resting on his jacket button like he'd been born under a spotlight instead of raised in a 2-bedroom apartment in Mardivision of Bridgeport. Then he dropped to one knee. The room exploded. For a full second, my brain refused to translate what my eyes were sending it. A skit, I thought. Some strange company morale stunt. Then Sophie pressed both hands over her mouth, and her eyes filled. And Ryan opened a small velvet box. The diamond caught the light. The exact cut I had once told him, years ago, that I loved. People cheered as Sophie nodded. Ryan slid the ring onto her finger. Then he stood, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her. Not a nervous kiss, not confusion, not an accident. A man does not kiss a woman like that in front of 200 witnesses unless he has already rehearsed betraying his wife in his head 1,000 times. The flowers slipped lower in my hand. A woman beside me whispered to her friend, "Can you believe it? They're perfect together." Perfect. That was the word that made Ryan finally turn his head. His eyes found mine across the atrium, and for half a second, all 200 voices in that room seemed to fold into silence. His smile dropped off his face like something physically removed. He knew. And still, he did not move. He didn't say my name. He didn't step off that stage. Sophie followed his gaze, looked at me, and gave the kind of polite, confused smile you give a stranger you can't quite place. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. "Do we know each other?" That was the moment I understood the full shape of it. Ryan hadn't just been unfaithful. He had erased me, deleted me from his own story so thoroughly that his fiancée didn't recognize his wife standing 40 feet away, holding roses. I turned around before my dignity could bleed out in front of 200 strangers. No one stopped me. The receptionist smiled on my way out. "Have a great Valentine's Day." I made it to the parking garage before my hands started shaking. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment without turning the key, just staring at the elevator doors across the concrete, half expecting them to open, half expecting him to come running after me the way men do in movies. He didn't. Of course he didn't. There were 200 people upstairs still cheering his name, and a woman on his arm who thought she knew the whole story. I thought about the drive home. 22 minutes, door to door. A route I could have driven with my eyes closed after 14 years. I thought about how many of those minutes over the years. I'd spent rehearsing conversations we never actually had. The ones where I told him I felt invisible inside his own company. The ones where I asked why my name never once made it into an interview, not even as a footnote. I always talked myself out of those conversations. Too petty, I told myself. Too much like keeping score. Funny how the one actually keeping score turned out to be him. I sat in my car with the roses on the passenger seat and a black envelope in my lap. First-class tickets to Paris, tucked inside a handwritten card. 4 nights near the same neighborhood where we'd spent our honeymoon, back before his suits were tailored and his watch cost more than our first car. I could hear the applause still echoing somewhere behind my eyes. I could have gone back in. I could have thrown the roses at his feet and given the whole company the spectacle it was already half enjoying. But there's a kind of rage that gets quiet instead of loud. Mine went quiet. I opened my phone and canceled Paris first. Then I called the bank and froze every account requiring joint authorization under our marital asset agreement. Then I called our attorney, David Marsh, a man who had represented my father for 20 years before he started representing me. "Claire," he said, alarm sharpening his voice instantly. "What's wrong?" "My husband just got engaged," I said, "to his CEO, in front of the entire company." A silence so total, I could hear him breathing. "I'm coming to the office," he said. "No," I said, "start with the holding company." Another silence. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" I stared through the windshield at the elevator doors, half expecting Ryan to burst through them, breathless, chasing me down. He never came. "Withdraw the full position," I said. "I know what it triggers." "Claire, that's an 83% stake. Pulling it collapses their credit line. It kills the pending acquisition. It could sink the entire company." I pressed my thumb into the edge of the Paris envelope until it cut my skin. "Do it." By the time I got home, the calls had started. 15, then 50. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was over 150, and Ryan's black company car sat crooked at the curb, like he'd abandoned it mid-motion. Now here we were, him on the porch, me in the hallway. A closed door between us that had never be, in 14 years, needed a lock before tonight. I opened it halfway. His tie was crooked, his hair was disheveled, sweat shone on his face despite the February cold. His eyes swept past me, toward the kitchen, toward the flowers sitting on the island like evidence at a trial. "Claire," he said, "it wasn't what it looked like." I almost laughed. Even now, Even now, he thought the affair was the problem. He had no idea the fire was already 3 rooms deep behind him. "Then tell me," I said, "what exactly did it look like?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His phone rang. Not mine, his. He glanced down, and whatever name lit up the screen drained the color from his face in an instant. I knew before he said a word. The board had found out. Ryan silenced the call without answering. "We need to talk." "Inside," he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice like our quiet street in Ridgefield might actually be listening. It probably was. That town specialized in pretending not to notice things while noticing everything. "No," I said. "Please, I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I said. "You proposed to another woman in front of 200 employees. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Repeated. For a long time." His jaw tightened. It got out of hand. That was Ryan's gift, and maybe his curse. He could describe any disaster like weather, a thing that happened to him, never a thing he chose. "When did it get out of hand?" I asked. "Before or after the ring?" His phone buzzed again. He turned the screen away, but not fast enough. I caught the name. "David Marsh, my lawyer." His eyes came back to my face, and the panic sharpened into something else. Calculation. I recognized that look. I'd watched him wear it across 100 conference tables, whenever a deal started slipping out of his control. "Claire, you can't just pull capital like that. There are procedures. There are clauses," I said, "and you signed them." He stared at me like I'd started speaking a language he used to understand and had let himself forget. 14 years earlier, Northgate Dynamics had been nothing, a half-built software prototype, a folding table, a name I wrote on a legal pad at 2 a.m. while Ryan slept on the office couch, exhausted from pitching investors who kept saying no. He talked about dreams back then, safer hospital record systems, faster data for overworked doctors, clinics that wouldn't drown in outdated software. He had the charisma, I had the architecture. My father had been the first real investor, not because he trusted Ryan, but because he trusted me. When my father died, his shares moved into a family holding company, and over the years, through funding rounds and buybacks and carefully worded agreements, that holding company ended up controlling 83% of everything Ryan called his. Ryan knew this. He'd known it when he asked me to stay out of the public-facing side of the business, because in his words, investors feel more comfortable with a single voice. He'd known it when he convinced me my privacy was a strategic advantage, that I could steer things from the boardroom while he handled the interviews, the keynotes, the champagne. And I let him, because I told myself marriage wasn't a competition for credit. Knowing a fact and respecting it, it turns out, are two very different things. "You're angry," he said, forcing softness into his voice. "You have every right to be angry." "I have every right," I said, "to have known my husband was living as an unmarried man at his own office." His face flinched. "Good." "Sophie didn't know," he said quickly. That landed somewhere I didn't expect it to. "Didn't know what?" "About us. Not really. I told her we were separated." The cold that moved through me then was clean and exact. "You told her we were separated," I repeated, "while you slept in my bed every night." He closed his eyes. "While you hosted my mother for Thanksgiving. While we renewed the lake house insurance together last month. While you kissed me goodbye this morning." His eyes opened. For one flicker of a second, I saw the man from the folding table days, the one who used to hate disappointing me. Then fear buried him again. "The board is overreacting," he said. "This can still be managed." Managed, not repaired. Managed. I stepped back and picked up the black envelope from the console table. I hadn't meant to bring it inside, but there it was in my hand. "These were for Paris," I said. Grief crossed his face. It arrived 4 hours too late to matter. "I thought we needed a few days away," I said. "I thought you'd been distant because of the acquisition, because of stress, because of everything you always told me was temporary." It's complicated, he said. No, software integration is complicated. Marriage is hard. Lying is simple. His phone buzzed again, then mine. A message from David, emergency board meeting, 7:30 tonight. They want you on video. Do not discuss corporate matters with Ryan. I turned the screen toward him just long enough for him to read the first line. Claire, don't do this tonight. I didn't do anything tonight, I said. You did. He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time all evening, he looked older than 46. Not distinguished, just tired and cornered. If I'm removed, the company destabilizes, he said. People lose their jobs. Good people. Mortgages. Families. That's the first honest thing you've said all night, I said. And it should have mattered to you before you turned their workplace into your engagement party. He had no answer for that. I remembered. Standing there, the early years, how he used to call the company ours, even in front of investors, even when it embarrassed him a little. Because back then, he still believed the credit didn't need dividing to count. I wondered exactly when that changed. Whether there was a single meeting, a single headline, a single moment where he decided the story sounded cleaner with just one name in it. I doubted even he could point to it. That's usually how erosion works. Nobody remembers the exact day the shoreline moved. For years, whenever a conversation got uncomfortable, I had simply walked into another room. Whenever a question got too specific, he took a call. Whenever I mentioned feeling lonely, he blamed deadlines. But there was nowhere left to walk. The life he'd spent years dividing into separate, soundproofed rooms had finally collapsed into one house. And he was standing outside it. Does Sophie know now? I asked. His silence answered for him. Then go explain it to her. Claire, please. I started closing the door. He reached out, not touching me, just close enough that I saw his hand shaking. Are you divorcing me? The word should have felt enormous. Instead, it felt administrative. Like naming a document that years of small humiliations had already drafted. Yes, I said. His face crumpled. Then, almost instantly, the fear came back. And the company. I looked at him through the narrowing gap in the door. The company, I said, was never yours. I shut it, locked it, stood there while he knocked once, twice, then stopped. A minute later, his car door slammed. Through the window, I watched him sit behind the wheel without starting the engine, shoulders bent, phone pressed to his ear. I didn't know if he was calling Sophie, the board, or another lawyer, for the first time in 14 years. I realized I didn't need to know. At 7:30, I sat at my own kitchen table in a plain navy sweater, a glass of water beside my laptop. David's face steady on the screen. One by one, board members joined the call. Every face careful. Every face frightened in that specific, professional way people get when they sense their names might end up in a headline. Then Ryan appeared, not on my porch anymore, in his executive office, beneath a framed magazine cover calling him the man who reinvented medical data. Tie gone, top button undone. For a man who'd spent a decade mastering every public appearance, he suddenly looked ordinary, almost small. The chairman didn't waste time on pleasantries. We've received notice, he said, that Bennett Family Holdings has withdrawn its equity commitment and suspended all discretionary support effective immediately. No one looked at Ryan. Every eye on that call turned to me. Mrs. Whitfield, the chairman said, can you confirm the notice is authentic? Yes. And Bennett Family Holdings remains the beneficial owner of 83% of Northgate Dynamics. Yes. The silence that followed felt like it lasted a full minute. Several directors had known the ownership structure existed on paper. Paper and reality, it turns out, are very different things when the man on camera has spent years being called the founder by every magazine, every investor, every reporter who never bothered to check the cap table. I watched their faces rearrange themselves in real time. There's a particular kind of expression people get when a fact they'd technically known suddenly becomes a fact they have to act on. Carol Whitman, who'd sat on the board for 6 years. Looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not the quiet woman who occasionally showed up to the holiday party, but someone who had apparently been holding the entire building up the whole time. I didn't feel triumphant watching that recognition land. Mostly, I felt tired, the way you feel tired after finally saying out loud something you'd swallowed for years. Ryan leaned toward his own camera. Claire, please don't make permanent decisions based on today's emotions. David's hand rested lightly on my legal pad, a silent reminder not to answer emotionally. I made no decisions today, I said evenly. I exercised rights that have existed for years. Ryan closed his eyes. The chairman turned toward him. Ryan, is there anything you need to disclose before we continue? A long pause. My personal situation has become complicated. Complicated, one director repeated flatly. Board member Carol Whitman folded her hands. Did you represent yourself inside this company as unmarried? Yes. Were you, in fact, married? Yes. Did executive leadership know that? No. The room went painfully quiet. Nobody on that call cared that Ryan had been unfaithful. That was a marriage problem. What they cared about was that their CEO had concealed material facts about his personal life while conducting a highly visible relationship with another senior executive inside the company on company time. That wasn't infidelity anymore. That was a governance crisis. General Counsel spoke next. Given these disclosures, I recommend Mr. Whitfield be placed on immediate administrative leave pending an independent investigation. Ryan looked straight into his camera. You cannot be serious. The chairman sighed. I wish we weren't. By 8:30 that night, the story hadn't reached the press. It didn't need to. Inside Northgate, rumors moved faster than any press release ever could. Someone spotted Ryan leaving the executive floor carrying a cardboard box. Someone noticed Sophie's office door staying shut for the rest of the evening. Security quietly deactivated his badge. A photo of the empty office made its way through 3 separate group chats before 10 p.m. Nobody posted it publicly. Not yet. I woke the next morning after maybe 3 hours of sleep. Ryan wasn't beside me for the first time in longer than I could remember. The quiet felt strange. Not lonely, just unfamiliar, like a room rearranged while I was out. I made coffee, fed our golden retriever, Bailey, who had no idea anything in the world had changed. I watched kids waiting for the school bus outside, and something in me settled at the sight of it. My world had come apart overnight. Everyone else's hadn't. At 9:15, David arrived carrying 2 thick folders. The banks responded, he said. They've suspended the acquisition financing. I expected that. They're asking whether Bennett Holdings intends to stay invested after restructuring. I looked at the folders without opening them yet. What did you tell them? The truth, that the owner still believes in the company. That surprised me more than it should have. You never wanted to destroy Northgate, David said, watching my face. You wanted to stop one man from pretending he owned it. Exactly. Revenge. People always imagine means burning everything to the ground. Sometimes it just means refusing to keep funding someone else's theft of your own credit. Around noon, my phone lit up. Sophie Landry. I stared at her name for a long moment before answering. I know I probably have no right to call you, she said. Her voice sounded nothing like it had on that platform. Thin, fragile. You probably don't, I said honestly. She accepted that without arguing. I didn't know. I believe you. She exhaled hard, like she'd been holding her breath all morning. He told me you two had been separated for almost 2 years. He said the divorce paperwork was delayed over business assets. He even showed me an apartment lease. I went still. What apartment? Silence. He rents a place downtown, she said quietly. I looked at the wall of my own kitchen and understood, in one nauseating instant, exactly what that apartment was for. Not somewhere to live, somewhere to produce evidence of a separated life he'd never actually left. Every late meeting, every overnight strategy session, every trip that ran too long to drive home from. There had always been somewhere else. Not because he needed another life, because he needed proof of one. "I feel sick," Sophie whispered. "You should." "I never would have." "I know. I'm so sorry." For the first time since Valentine's Day, I heard something in another person's voice that sounded like real remorse, unattached to strategy. "I believe you're sorry," I said, "but sorry doesn't undo it." "No," she agreed. Then, quietly, "Will you ever forgive me?" I looked out at the frozen flower beds in my backyard. "I don't know you well enough to forgive you," I said. She didn't push. "That's fair." Late that afternoon, David called again. Something in his voice caught my attention before he'd even said a full sentence. "We found something," he said. "What?" "Old authorization records. Come look." I drove to his office. Dozens of documents were spread across his conference table: expense approvals, equity transfer forms, investment authorizations. At a glance, ordinary. Then he pointed to a row of signatures. "These are yours." I frowned. "No, they're excellent copies." My stomach folded in on itself. "I never signed these." "I know." He slid another document beside them, my actual signature. The difference was there, once you knew to look. Tiny, almost invisible, but there. Someone had been forging my signature on corporate documents for years. "How many?" I asked. "We're bringing in forensic analysts to review every executive authorization from the last 5 years. "How many, David?" "Hundreds." I sat back, slowly. Every emotion I'd carried since Valentine's Day rearranged itself in that moment. Until then, I thought this story was about infidelity. It was becoming something much larger. Fraud, possible criminal exposure. "Claire," David said carefully, "you need to prepare yourself." "For what?" "If the investigation confirms what we suspect, Ryan isn't just going to lose his marriage." I finished it for him. "He's going to lose everything." David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence on that table already had. The next 48 hours moved with the precision of a machine. David brought in a forensic accounting firm out of New York, the kind that doesn't ask unnecessary questions and doesn't use dramatic language unless a document actually earns it. They set up in a locked conference room. Badge access restricted, blinds drawn, banker's boxes of old approvals, wire transfers, board packets, executive compensation files. I didn't go to the office. That was deliberate. If I showed up too early, the story would turn into a public war between a wife and a husband. And Ryan would use every ounce of that narrative to paint me as a woman acting out of heartbreak instead of evidence. So I stayed home. I let the professionals do what Ryan had always underestimated. They followed the paper. By the third day, they found the pattern. Not one forged signature, not a handful, a system. My name had authorized temporary executive loans, inflated travel reimbursements, fast-tracked vendor contracts tied to people Ryan knew personally. None of it screamed fraud on its own. That was what made it dangerous. Polished, layered, wrapped in language clean enough to slide past busy hands. But paper trails age badly. Every document carries a timestamp. Every approval carries metadata. Every wire transfer leaves a fingerprint somewhere. At 6:12 on a Thursday evening, David called. "Claire, we have enough." I was standing in my laundry room, folding one of Ryan's white dress shirts. Because habit is sometimes the last part of love that dies. I looked at the monogram on the cuff and felt suddenly foolish for even touching it. Enough for the board. Enough for the board. Enough for civil action. Possibly enough to refer to federal authorities. I closed my eyes. For one brief, useless second, I wished the truth had turned out smaller. Then I remembered him kissing Sophie under that skylight while 200 people applauded a lie. "Send it," I said. This time. Ryan wasn't invited as chief executive. He was invited as the subject of an investigation. Sophie appeared on the call from her own office, pale but composed. She'd stepped back from all decision-making tied to Ryan, and the board had accepted it without argument. She didn't defend herself. She didn't try to blame me. "Did you know he was married?" the chairman asked her directly. "No," she said clearly. "He told me he'd been separated for 2 years." "Did he ever disclose that Mrs. Whitfield controlled a majority stake in the company?" She looked down for a moment. "No. He told me his wife had no operational involvement and that the ownership was, his words, old family paperwork." Old family paperwork? That was what Ryan had reduced my father's investment to. My years of labor. My chosen silence. The forensic team went next. No raised voices. None needed. They walked through signatures, metadata, wire approvals, lease agreements, executive expense records, the apartment downtown, filed as a strategic client hospitality suite, jewelry purchases logged as investor relations gifts, private trips booked through corporate accounts, trips Sophie had believed were business retreats. Because Ryan had surrounded every lie with just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate. Sophie covered her mouth once. Only once. Ryan sat frozen. When he finally spoke, his voice came out thin. This is being taken out of context. The lead investigator, a sharp, unhurried woman named Diane Cross, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Whitfield, metadata doesn't have context. It has timestamps." No one smiled. I almost did. Ryan tried again. "I had authority to act on behalf of the company." "You had operational authority," Diane said. "You did not have authority to forge Mrs. Whitfield's signature." His eyes moved to me then, and for the first time all week, I saw real anger underneath the fear. "You're enjoying this," he said. Every face on that call turned toward me. I could have denied it. Instead, I told the truth. "No, Ryan, I'm not enjoying this." A breath. "I'm surviving it." That silenced him. For good. By noon the next day, the board voted unanimously to terminate Ryan for cause. All unvested equity revoked. His name pulled from every active company document until the matter resolved. Findings referred to outside counsel for civil recovery. Sophie remained on administrative leave pending her own ethics review. Preliminary results already suggested what the room had suspected all along. She'd been deceived, not complicit. No shouting, no thrown glass, no dramatic scene. The revenge, if you could call it that, arrived in signatures, votes, and locked accounts. Somehow, that made it feel more complete than anything louder could have. That afternoon, Sophie asked to meet me in person. I almost said no. Then I thought about her face when she learned about the apartment and realized there was one conversation left in this story that Ryan didn't get to script. We met at a small coffee shop in Wilton, far enough from the office that no one would recognize either of us. She was already there when I arrived. No makeup, or almost none. No ring on her hand anymore. She stood when I sat down. "I'm sorry," she said. "You already said that." "I know. I needed to say it looking at you." I studied her face and found no arrogance in it. No trace of the polished woman under the skylight. Just a clean, brutal kind of humiliation. "I believed him," she said. "That's not an excuse. It's just true." I know. He made me feel chosen. That sentence hurt more than I expected, because I understood it completely. Ryan had always known how to make a woman feel like the room had rearranged itself around her. "When I saw you in the atrium," she said, "I thought you were an investor's wife or someone on a charity board. I didn't know I was standing inside your life." Neither of us spoke for a while. "He lied to both of us," I finally said. "But he married me. His first obligation was to me." She nodded, eyes filling. I know. I could have hated her. Part of me wanted to. Hatred is so much easier to carry than the uncomfortable truth that the other woman isn't always a monster. Sometimes she's just another person standing in the wreckage, holding a different piece of the same lie. "I won't protect you from consequences," I said, "but I won't punish you for what he did alone either." Her eyes lifted to mine. That wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something close to justice. 3 nights later, Ryan came back to the house. This time, he didn't ring the bell over and over. He knocked once and waited. Through the window, I saw a man who barely resembled the husband I'd brought flowers to less than a week earlier. Wrinkled coat, unshaven, the confidence gone. And without it, he looked smaller, almost unfamiliar. I opened the door, chain still on. He looked at the chain, then at me. I deserve that. Yes. He swallowed. I lost the company. No, I said. You lost the illusion that it was ever yours. His eyes filled. I didn't soften. Not because I wanted him to suffer. I'd spent too many years softening hard truths until he learned how to step around them entirely. I'm not here to ask you to stop the investigation, he said. Good. I'm not here to ask you to take me back. Good. He nodded slowly, like each word cost him something. I came to say, I'm sorry. The old Claire might have reached for the chain. The old Claire might have mistaken his regret for the beginning of repair. But the woman standing there now had watched too much burn to confuse smoke for warmth. Are you sorry because you hurt me, I asked, or because your life fell apart? He looked down at the porch boards. A long silence. I don't know anymore, he finally said, and that admission was the first fully honest sentence he'd said to me since Valentine's Day. He waited another moment, like he thought I might say something that would make the future less frightening for him. I didn't. The silence between us didn't belong to resentment anymore. It belonged to something closer to truth. I understand, he finally said. I wasn't sure he did, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, that understanding wasn't my job to manage. I closed the door gently, not in anger. I watched through the side window as he walked back to his car, shoulders slumped, hands buried in his coat pockets, like a man who'd spent years climbing toward a summit, only to realize, at the top, that he'd been reading the wrong map the entire time. Bailey wandered into the hallway and pressed his head against my leg. I think we're going to be okay, I whispered. For the first time since Valentine's Day. I believed it. What came after? The divorce took months, the way real ones usually do. Financial disclosures, valuations, depositions, more paperwork than either of us thought possible. The prenuptial agreement and the ownership structure, both drawn up long before we ever said vows, made the legal side almost mechanical. Emotionally, nothing about it was simple. Ryan never contested my ownership of Northgate. He couldn't. The documents had existed for years, and the investigation had erased any illusion that the company had ever belonged to anyone but me. The forged signature claims moved to separate counsel and resolved through negotiated settlements restitution, and a permanent ban on Ryan ever serving as an officer of any company bound by those same agreements. Painful for him, but also just the accumulated weight of choices made repeatedly over years, not the punishment for one bad afternoon. Justice, I learned, rarely lands all at once. It arrives in carefully numbered pages. There was a strange kind of grief in watching it happen, one nobody warns you about. Every new document David called me about wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a small piece of the marriage I thought I'd had, quietly rewritten in front of me. A trip to Chicago I remembered him complaining about, exhausted, jet-lagged, missing our anniversary dinner because of, it turned out to have 3 days unaccounted for on the expense trail. A team offsite in Miami that Sophie later admitted she'd attended too. Holding hands with him on a hotel balcony, while I sat at home thinking he was stuck in back-to-back vendor meetings. None of it was cinematic. That was the part that surprised me most. I'd always imagined, if I ever found out something like this, there would be a single smoking gun moment, a text message, a hotel receipt, something dramatic enough to justify how much it hurt. Instead, it was just documents, spreadsheets, timestamps, a slow, bureaucratic unraveling of a decade, each page a little more mundane than the last, and somehow that made it worse, not better. Betrayal, it turns out, mostly looks like paperwork. Sophie completed her ethics review. Investigators found no evidence she'd participated in the forgeries or profited from the misconduct. Her only real mistake had been believing the man she loved. The board reinstated her as CEO 6 weeks later. Before accepting, she called me. I won't take it if you think I shouldn't. I appreciated the question more than she probably realized. You earned the job, I said. Do it honestly this time. That's all I ask. I don't expect us to be friends. Neither do I. But I hope one day you'll believe I never wanted your life. I looked out at my backyard, at the first hard edges of spring pushing up through frozen dirt. I already believed that, I said. When we hung up, I realized forgiveness had arrived without announcing itself. Not the complete kind that erases every scar, just enough to stop carrying someone else's guilt around like it belonged to me. The board asked if I wanted to become CEO myself, years earlier. I would have said yes before the question finished leaving someone's mouth. Instead, I surprised even myself. No. The chairman blinked. You built this company. Yes. You own it. Yes. Then why? I smiled. Because ownership and purpose aren't always the same thing. I took the role of executive chair instead, long-term strategy, while Sophie ran daily operations. It was the arrangement I probably should have chosen years earlier. Not because I couldn't lead in public, because leadership works best when it actually reflects who you are instead of who everyone else has decided you should become. For the first time in years, the company felt honest. 3 months after Valentine's Day, I found the old Paris envelope tucked in a desk drawer. The flights had long since been canceled. The hotel reservation, gone. The handwritten card I'd written for Ryan was still folded inside. I read it once. Then I fed it through the shredder. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. That evening, I booked another trip. Same city, different hotel, one ticket. Paris met me with cold sunlight and cafes spilling onto narrow sidewalks. I walked without an itinerary. I got lost in bookstores where I understood maybe half the language on the shelves. I sat by the river with coffee that went cold because I kept watching people instead of drinking it. On my second evening, I crossed the same bridge where Ryan and I had once stood years earlier, making promises we didn't keep. Back then, we'd been two broke 20-somethings pretending we could see the future from a bridge over the Seine, laughing about the exchange rate on the wine list. I remembered exactly how his hand had felt around mine that night. Certain, warm, entirely convincing. It's strange how a hand can tell you the truth and a lifetime later turn out to have been lying the whole time. I didn't cry on that bridge. I thought I might. Instead, I just stood there for a long while, watching the boats go under, feeling something in my chest finally loosen that had been tight since February. This time, I made only one promise, and I made it to myself. Never confuse being needed with being valued. They are not the same thing. Almost a year later, Northgate launched a new initiative funding early-stage healthcare startups founded by women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. The idea had been sitting, half-formed, in one of my old notebooks for almost a decade. We finally built it. At the launch, Sophie thanked the board, thanked the employees. Then, unexpectedly, she thanked me. Some people build companies, she said. Others build cultures where the truth eventually matters more than appearances. We are here because Claire Bennett refused to sacrifice either. The applause that followed sounded nothing like the applause from that atrium on Valentine's Day. That earlier applause had celebrated an illusion. This one honored something real. A few weeks after that, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter in Ryan's handwriting. He'd taken a management job at a small regional software company in Vermont. No magazine covers, no keynote stages, no corner office. He wrote that every morning he unlocked the office himself, made coffee for the staff, and went home every night knowing exactly what his own title meant. Employee, he apologized again, not for losing the company this time, for spending years believing that success entitled him to break every promise he'd ever made to the people who actually loved him. At the bottom of the page, one last line. I hope one day I become someone worthy of the forgiveness I asked for. I put the letter in a box with old photographs, not to relive any of it, but because pretending it never happened would have taught me nothing. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. They don't deserve to be erased. People ask me sometimes whether revenge brought me peace. Honestly, no. Revenge brought me justice. Peace came later. Quieter. On its own schedule. It arrived the day I stopped measuring my future by the size of someone else's betrayal. Ryan lost his marriage because he chose deception over honesty. He lost his career because he chose ambition over integrity. He lost the company because he forgot that borrowed power is never the same thing as earned trust. As for me, I didn't win because he lost. I won because I finally remembered that my worth was never something someone else had the power to grant or take away. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's simply refusing to let their choices decide who you become next. So here's my real question for you. If you found out tonight that the person you trusted most had been lying to your face for years, not for one afternoon, but for years, would you have done what I did? Or would you have burned it all down? Louder. Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is the kind of story that gets under your skin, betrayal, quiet power. The moment the truth finally catches up to someone, don't scroll past it. Hit subscribe now because the next one is even messier than this, and you don't want to miss how it ends.